This is a Ben Frank Connection presentation.
Well, greetings and salutations. We are glad you have joined us this evening for the long overdue and very first episode of Tabletop Baristas. I, of course, am your host. I am the captain. You may recognize me from some other Opinion City shows, but here I am the captain, and I am joined by my good friend and compatriot in this endeavor. He is the master of tables himself, Joseph Tamburo, the great, joining us today. You will see his chosen name for this podcast is Constantine. No surprise there. How are you this evening, sir?
I'm doing very well. I've been really looking forward to getting this off the ground. This has been like a long time in coming.
Yeah, this is very exciting. We've been gaming together for many more years than I'd like to admit, and just this iteration of our gaming adventures together that we're going to talk about today is it's really exciting. It's really exciting to be able to tell people about.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing here. It's great, but I think maybe we should tell everybody we have an additional guest who may make a visual appearance, but you guys can probably hear him. That's Hermes the pigeon. For some reason tonight, he has decided he wants to hang out and hoot and oot and coo off on the side. So if you see something fly over onto me, that's Hermes the pigeon.
Yes, Hermes the pigeon is the unofficial third member of the
right.
podcast. But as I stated in the beginning, there we are here tonight to discuss campaign number 1, which is the org, and of course, this is episode number 1, the backstory. So let's talk a little bit about let's talk about you a little bit first. Let's kind of give our listeners a bit of a gaming background, if you will, so people who don't know. Yeah, this is always a loaded question. This is always but let's
this is Sherman's Wayback Machine.
So I'll tell you this much. So this is what we do on the Opinion City podcast. When we have wrestlers on, we ask them to give us what we like to call the dust jacket bio.
Dust jacket bio. Okay.
Some know what it is and some don't.
Yeah, no, I get it. There's the short version is I started role playing when I was literally 8 years old, back in the days of the boxed sets of the basic, advanced, like Masters campaigns of Dungeons and Dragons. Pretty quickly transitioned into AD&D, but we're talking the original run of books. Mm-hmm. And then there was sort of the reprint with first edition, second edition. Most of my time in the Dungeons and Dragons world was spent with that. Not sure how I feel about some of the new stuff, but that's a discussion for another time. From there, I've played everything from Top Secret to an RPG version of Mech Warrior, Star Wars, Star Frontiers, Ghostbusters. Boy, there's at least 2 or 3 more in there. Torg, that was a very short-lived bit.
Star Frontiers.
Yeah. Star Frontiers was a big one. That one was around for a long time. We played forever. Gamma World was actually another huge huge series of campaigns for us that spanned like years. That's the one thing I will say as part of my Dust Jacket version. It's unusual for us to do quickie campaigns.
Oh yes,
There's like we have these long overarching themes and just like epic sagas that just take years to work through.
And that's some of the beauty of tabletop role playing, is that you have these ideas that can just spawn from other ideas, and they just continue to kind of make their way down the pike, and you can just kind of piggyback off of each other, and there's never really any end. It's very it's very kind of flowing. So I would say that I've been gaming now for probably more than 30 years at this point, which is a harsh reality to to deal with. But yes, I've been gaming for probably over 30 years now. I've run the gamut again from D&D to Gamma World to a number of indie games, including running my own game, which
Yes.
at some point that'll probably be our next campaign we discuss. But I've kind of been all over the gamut. It was interesting you mentioned being involved with like basic Dungeons and Dragons, and then kind of moving into the advanced. It's amazing how many people today are like shocked when they see like the basic D&D set, because all they know is advanced Dungeons
and Dragons.
And there's this whole set that came long before before that, and it was it's just an interesting thing.
In fact, one of the things that we all neglected to mention that we'll be talking about later is we've also played quite a bit of Alternity.
Yes, interestingly enough. So we will be getting into that a little later. But while we're here, let's just kind of dive right in. Let's take a look at what we're really here to talk about, which is the org. So take it away, Joe. Give us a little bit of a little bit of history here.
The org it's a campaign that really was developed over an extensively long time. There'd be little bits and pieces of things, and one of the problems I think that in the development of this was it was very difficult to find a world setting that worked because of the components, and we'll talk about that in literally about a minute or two. So what we ended up having to do was kind of really look to smooth a variety of genres together in something that resembles a cohesive fashion. I think one of the great successes of this is I think it does blend well. That's my experience of it at any rate. And really what we're looking at is if you take something that resembles Hellboy, and then you take kind of the Men in Black idea and then sprinkle on just a little bit of the top of a little bit of that from the Cthulhu perspective and smush it together, that's kind of the world that's created. It's a modern horror fantasy with a really nice blush of sci-fi. I think that's the best way to describe it. To give a sense of it, there's been any number of things out there, I think, that sort of brush up against this. There is the Hellboy, there's the Men in Black. There was also a series, I think, I hope I'm saying the right thing. I believe it was on Netflix. It was called Bright, or it was a movie. It wasn't a series.
That was a movie. Yes, that was the one with Will Smith.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And it's sort of that esque, but it really focuses more on cosmic battles between light and dark, good and evil, and that really is sort of the focus of it. What it really starts to translate to nicely, I would think to say would be, what would the world be like today if in fact all of these awful things that go bump in the night were suddenly real and were there? How would the world react? And then also you also have to brush up against the reality that with this is that not everything that goes bump in the night is necessarily bad and evil. So you have to really, it's a world of, 360 shades of gray, if you will.
Mhm.
52 is not enough for this one, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the idea. In fact, the whole gist of this is, and the neat thing is there is a huge timeline that's involved here. There's sort of the stuff that is sort of pre-org, where you have like hunter clans, looking to go after some of these various creepy critters, all the way up through the birth of the organization that in fact is, we usually have played it as part of the FBI, although there's we've sort of batted around the idea maybe it should be Homeland Security, but it's one of those deals where that's the feel of it.
Sure.
And the idea is that there are parallel organizations that are scattered throughout the world in different countries. I mean, that's sort of the inception of it. And then what ended up happening was, after I had the world together, sort of mentally, the question became, well, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to roll with this? Well, the obvious solution at the time was to take a look at the D20 Modern campaign, because that was by far about the best. And then I will not lie, I cheated at that point, and I immediately went to one of the revisions of Gamma World, because that's gone through quite a few bits of changes as well. And I pulled out their D20 version, which happened to blend sort of well with some differences in terms of if I wanted futuristic equipment or things like that. And then, sort of designing some of my own bits and pieces.
Right.
And, realistically speaking, from there, then we ended up that the very, very, very first time the campaign was played was under the D20 system. And that was back when I was out in Western PA. Before coming back east. And when we came back east, we discovered a very different gaming system, the alternative game system. And we sort of put our heads together and we were really talking about that, and we kind of liked the way that worked better. But that's something we'll be moving into.
Sure.
The other interesting piece that I think is very important to realize is, while it is the epic struggle of good and evil, light and dark, and we have all these shades of gray, the reality is, the core of this is that it is sometimes very difficult to figure out who the good guys and bad guys are. I mean, Ralph, if you think back to the first time that we played this, everybody thought the org were the bad guys.
Sure.
And that's very intentional.
Sure. So a couple points to throw in here. You mentioned sort of Hellboy and Men in Black. I also think that you could legitimately say that there are elements of, say, the Dresden Files.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Elements of Grimm. It really it kind of takes the best parts of those and kind of wraps them all together.
And just for the record, the org universe came about before I read any Dresden books. I discovered those well after the fact.
Sure. Oh yes, I can attest to that. But I would also say that just to backtrack for a moment here. So this is the beauty of what we're attempting to do with this podcast, and that's really highlighting and discussing this idea of homebrews. And for those that aren't aware what a homebrew is, really it is taking a story, taking an idea that you have come up with, and sort of building out your world. Imagine the people who were first making Dungeons and Dragons when they were building out the ideas of the world that you were to play in, and then for the most part taking it and adapting it to an existing system. A lot of people, I think, these days try to come up with their own systems when there are plenty of great systems already out there that can just be adapted to it. And I don't think a lot of these systems end up working as well as the already established ones. But again, this is the real idea of home brewing a game. And so eventually we will have a series where we will be discussing everything from top to bottom as far as home brewing goes. But it's just important to understand those basics right now so that you can understand sort of where all of this is coming from, and how people continue to do this all the time, creating their own games.
Agreed. And realistically speaking, when you're not necessarily developing all the mechanics, but you could adapt what's there, one of the biggest benefits to that is it doesn't take you 3 years to figure out the math, or even perhaps more importantly, is most of the main game systems are relatively well balanced. So as long as you don't completely go off the reservation when you're making your adjustments, chances are you're going to be able to keep it pretty well balanced. The other thing, though, is with homebrews, that's really important to keep in mind, is you're probably going to have to make adjustments as you go.
Yes.
I mean, I seem to remember an instance in another campaign where we were trying to introduce magic and trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And the first run of that wasn't very successful. It was funny, but
yeah, it's home brewing, especially when working with an established system, is a lot of trial and error. Even when we started using the alternity system and trying to figure out what rules we thought worked well for us, what rules we didn't think worked so well, and how do we work around those? How do we make them fit what we're doing?
By the way, there's Hermes.
Oh,
trying to figure out which way to move here.
Yeah. Oh, there he is. Yep. All right. Very cool. This is kind of, where the whole purpose of this podcast is really coming from. The inspiration is just the home brewing that we've done to this point. Talk a little bit about when all of this came together, how you decided to put the game together, your inspiration. There's been other inspirations that have contributed greatly to the story and the world. And you actually did run campaigns with this game, elsewhere before you brought them here.
Right. The original one was kind of my test fire, if you will. That was the D20. And really what it boiled down to was, at that particular point, people wanted to RP role play, but they didn't really know what they wanted to. And I had been chatting with friends, and they had said, well, come up with something. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
And I went, well, all right, let me think about it. And as funny as this is going to sound, I literally happened to watch Hellboy and Men in Black. And when I watched that, I was absolutely blown away. And all of a sudden I thought to myself, wait a minute, I have a magnificent idea. And then I went, well, wait a minute, let's take it one step further. And then I was like, all right, calm down. Think about it. Like, get your head screwed on here. Let's focus. And it's like, well, what is this going to look like? And that's when I sort of started to think about the timelines. And it's like, well, what would you need an extensive group for? Like what would this look like? And really what it starts to come down to, you start to ask yourself questions. It's like, all right, this is sort of what I'm thinking, but now let's transition this into what looks like the real world. And then I decided, well, I had spent some time in Pittsburgh and out that way prior to being out in that section of Western Bay. It was a different part of Western Bay. I was in Pittsburgh.
Sure.
And I thought to myself, I have an idea. Let's just try this. Because I remember when they were building the one FBI building and they were tearing down some old mills and building shopping centers and stuff. And it was sort of in the same general vicinity. And I'm thinking, So I did the next crazy thing and I started to look on the internet. Back at the time, it wasn't quite as delightful as it is now. And that goes back more years than I care to think about too.
Sure.
So I'll leave everybody in a secret. Ralph's playing for about 30 years. I've been playing for 42.
Yeah, so we're the old folks around these parts.
Yep. I mean, eventually when we're all in a nursing home together, we're going to have a gaming room.
We are
for our wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Gonna happen. So what I then decided was, well, all right, well, what system am I going to use? What am I going to do? And literally at that point, it was like, I'm like, I don't want to use the Dungeons and Dragons system per se because it doesn't give me what I want here. I can't find this.
Mhm.
And honestly, I was being lazy because my life was
Mhm.
extraordinarily busy. And
Sure.
it's like I need something that was kind of move in ready.
Mhm.
And I started looking around, and there was, wait a minute, what are these D20? This, that, anything, a D20 modern. I happened to pick the book up, and I read through it, and I went, that'll work. And it was close enough to Dungeons and Dragons at the time that it was a very smooth transition for me.
Mhm.
And excuse me. And most of the other people had a half an idea of how that worked. I went, all right, well, this will be perfect.
Mhm.
And then what ends up happening is as I'm bringing them into this world, and it was some of the hilarity, some of those discussions we'll save for another time, but
Mhm.
some of the funny stuff that happened as people were trying to figure this world out,
Sure.
it was wonderful. And at that time, we were friends, but now my other half, she and I had been chatting, and the next thing you know, she said, because she likes to write, she's very artistic,
Mhm.
she's
Sure.
working, she does art commissions, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Had a brilliant stroke of genius. She said, there were some characters I had drabbled and written in the past, um, that would fit in perfectly into this world. And I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds great. And then, we sat down and we talked about it. And I went, yeah, that's absolutely spot on. We could certainly do that. And then the world started to expand because when we introduced those characters, it opened up veins into other areas of
Mm.
that horror fantasy that I had wanted to include, but couldn't quite like make all the connections of how I
Sure.
wanted to do it.
Sure.
And then before I knew it, it was just there.
Mhm.
It kind of almost fell into our laps when we put our heads together. It was kind of an amazing piece. Um, Prompt me here, but I'm not like I could go on for too many hours with this, so
Sure,
you have
sure.
to
No,
direct me
no,
here a
no,
little bit.
please. So, all right. So you started putting all of this together. You've got your system in place. You've got
Mhm.
your world in place now. You're introducing characters.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, that was the
so
fun part because with
yes.
D20 Modern, it's not as easy as I'm going to be a paladin. Hmm. Okay, what does that look like? And then the question was also, how deep did we want to start the characters in this world?
Mhm.
And what we opted to do, and at this point, there was one, two, three, four. We had a group of seven or eight for my test run of this. So
Okay.
this wasn't two or three people. This was this was a much larger group.
Yes.
And what we decided on was that we were going to have each person make an idealized version of themselves.
Mhm.
Like if you could do anything you wanted to in life, what would it be? The caveat was, you're not going to be a bajillionaire, thank you, or a government
Sure.
leader. It's more of the common folk, if you will.
Okay.
We had somebody who wanted to be a rock star. I'm like, all right, that sounds good. We had somebody who was a police officer. We had somebody who was a professor. We had a security guard. We had an EMT. Like it was an incredibly like diverse group, and it was all effectively ideas and professions out of the real world. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, they were getting basically sucked into the world of the org, and
Got you.
that's kind of how that came down.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's a little different in this particular universe is skill selection. And this is where, we've always kind of run it this way. And again, we haven't completely codified all of it yet. That's in the works.
Mhm.
But really, when we're picking skills, it's not a question of you have 5 skill points or 50 skill points or whatever, or
Mhm.
level it up, but you can't go past blah, 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 blah. It's more a question of what is your profession? What are you good at? What makes sense
Mhm.
for the character?
Sure. Sure.
So the paramedic was a paramedic and had been so for, several years, and had a lot of experience and worked in trauma. And this is where like one of the key points of this is developing the background stories.
Sure.
In this particular style, it's not enough to just say, I had an unhappy youth and I decided to run away and become a jack of all trades. Like that just it's not going to work.
No.
Or I was a soldier. Okay, well, literally, what did you do?
Yeah. Get a
It's
little
like,
more specific.
do you want to be able to drive a tank? How
Right.
are you with a firearm? Like, and
Mhm.
it's always a matter of discussion with your game master.
Mhm.
And what I basically told everybody was, I said, shoot for the stars. If you think it makes sense, make an argument for me.
Mhm.
And okay, most of the time, and I think you can attest to this. I'm like, wait, you want to give yourself a level 2? No, that's at least a level 3 or 4.
Yeah. You're very sort of you are, I think, more realistic to a fault than others are, because you want, if somebody's going to pick something, for example, as an EMT, you know, they're going to have those skills at a certain level. So
Yes.
people tend to not want to, like, really get crazy, or really, they don't want to look like they're overpowering their characters, but most of the time they end up underpowering their characters. And
Mhm.
you're like, no, we need to fix that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the, I think, the beautiful things
Mhm.
about homebrews when you start to do it. It's the one thing though with homebrews I will say is you have to be very careful, because if you have anybody who's going to be a rules lawyer, they're going to drive you bananas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Especially when you're testing it out and you're trying to get it going. You
Mhm.
know, the, the mistakes are going to be made, and stop.
Sure.
And as a game master, as long as you're willing to go, "Ooh, we need to hit the rewind on that. That's not how that's supposed to be." Or
Yeah.
if you have a way in game to fix it.
Mhm.
Um,
Sure.
that's just assuming nobody did anything stupid. And here's where I think I get to point out one of my favorite lines that always made my
Oh,
players
here it is.
cringe. I'd
Yes.
sit there and I'd look at them very just directly and say, "Are you sure you want to do that?"
That's
Um,
that's why your character in the opening video is wagging the finger, because it's like,
yeah, so yeah,
you sure you want to do that?
and and
It's a
and and
famous
Ralph,
line.
you've actually seen where people are
Uh,
like, "Sure,"
yeah, yeah.
and it doesn't usually go well, and it's like, all right, I
No,
tried.
they end up, destroying something they shouldn't, and
Mhm.
then they're, married to a fae, and
Yes.
it's nightmares. It
It's
really is. And they don't even have to be there for that to
yeah,
happen.
yeah, that
It
was
just
magnet.
needs
Yeah.
somebody playing their character while they're gone. And
That was wonderful.
so, for those that for those that don't know, we'll let you in on the secret here. So, uh Joe's brother Dave also tends to play with us in these role-playing groups, and Dave has a problem with dice. Dave's dice, to a fault, hate him more than I have ever seen dice hate anybody in my entire life. And the thing is, though, when Dave is not present and Dave has, left his character for someone else to play while he's not there, because again, this is one of the things that you need to know about this game, and this is one of the reasons why, sort of making sure your character is at the correct level. You need your entire team, and you need your entire characters to be at 100% to survive in this world. And so, if people are going to be absent for a session, they'll leave their characters so someone else can play them, so you have the full complete team. Well, Dave doesn't even have to be there. Somebody just has to be playing his character, and their dice instantly hate them in playing Dave's character. And this ended up hilariously one time in Dave's character being, sealed to a member of a high member of a Fey court,
Court.
and it
Yep.
was just very, very evil and very bad for Dave.
Well, it wasn't necessarily evil. I mean, it
Well,
was certainly of
I
all the
don't know.
people his character could have got tied up with, that was about the best.
Dave thought it was evil.
Oh yeah, he was. Well,
He was
but just because he's my brother does not mean he knew what was actually going on.
no, he was bent out of shape in ways that I've not seen him bent out
Yeah.
of shape in a while.
Well, part of the reason was the person who was playing him really did do some stupid things.
Yeah, it's a
In
combination of
speaking
all
to a
these
Fae, he
things.
repeats things 3 times. Like,
Yes.
okay, That's
Yeah.
that's smart.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that, but it is highly important that your characters be
Yeah.
at a certain level to
And
play in this
interestingly
game.
enough, to sort of piggyback on that is, this particular homebrew is not for the faint of heart. I mean, this is definitely
Hmm.
like an adult, like mature campaign. Um,
Yes, it's
and because the subject matter can get difficult. There's been any number of times after playing, and they got to speak with one of the big baddies in passing. I often felt like I absolutely needed to go take a shower.
it is definitely an R-rated game. That is
Yep.
for sure. It is not I don't want to say it's over the top, but it is definitely an R-rated game. You understand why you are good and why these people are evil. There is no
Mhm.
it is made very, when you meet the evil people, you understand that they're evil. So yeah, it's again, it is, it's just the world,
Yep.
the way it's built, and so yeah, it's
Yeah. Well, one of the most frustrating things, at least for me, and
mhm,
I don't know, how many others would agree with it, is oftentimes when we're playing, in some other systems or even other worlds, and some of it just
mhm,
depends on the game master, I suppose. But
mhm,
it's like you sort of scratch your head a little bit, and I have no choice but to ask, why are these bad guys top villains? Like, are you kidding me? Is
mhm,
it is it like a spoiled piece of candy from Willy Wonka world, or what? It's like, if and
sure,
when you start to approach more epic cosmic battle stuff, there needs to be a much heavier, stark delineation. And bad and evil people do bad and evil things, and
mhm,
things that were never people, that are based on destruction or hatred or whatever, are going to be kind of the epitome of whatever it is that they're representing.
mhm,
And the more you express that in this campaign, in this world, the more realistic it feels. It actually adds the realism, as opposed to making it more of a caricature.
mhm.
Um, this might be a good point to, Ralph. What do you think? Is this a good point to talk about some of the major forces in the world, or
Yeah, let's here, let's do this first. So let's talk a
sure?
little bit about your first campaign was really based all around
Oh
the
yeah, yeah,
D20 system, but our most
yes,
recent campaign was built around the alternity system. So
yes.
let's just
Let
briefly
Yeah.
talk a little bit about alternity. And before we do that, I want to preface this with this. If you and we're just doing a brief overview of some of the highlights of alternity here. And we will, as this podcast continues in future episodes, we will dive more into how alternity really takes center stage as far as
Mhm.
certain things in this campaign. But if you're looking for more information for alternity, there's a great website. It is alternityrpg.net. They've got tons of alternity resources. You can find all kinds of information, more homebrew stuff than even we do, and you can get a real sense of how alternity works and more of a history of
Mhm.
alternity. Alternity, for a while was a big influence on a lot of things, and it kind of has almost like a mythical kind of mythos to it at this point, because again they ended up bringing back alternity and
Mhm.
using modern D20 in the 5th edition of Gamma World, and so
Yep.
there was a bit of a crossover there. And then the actual alternity itself, the line was canceled, I believe, in 2000. But alternityrpg.net has all that information for you. But this is so. basically we have alternity. These are the two things you really need right off the bat to understand alternity and be able to play alternity. Obviously, the Game Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. These give you all sorts of information. There are also some really great resources. There's a arms and equipment guide, and as you'll see, the base game of alternity has two major settings. The first one being the Star Drive setting, which is basically sort of your space exploration. There's a whole long backstory and mythos to Star Drive as to certain planets, and a lot of it is based on faster than light technology, and it's very space epic. But the other camp,
cool.
it is very cool.
Very cool.
They do some really great things in Star Drive. The one thing that I think really is highlighted well in Star Drive is spaceships, their mechanics, and how spaceship battle works. I think they do that extremely well, very in depth and in detail. But then the other campaign is the Dark Matter campaign, and that is basically where we set this game. The org really kind of falls under the precipice of the Dark Matter campaign, and there are Dark Matter arms and equipment guides, and there's all kinds of wonderful things for you to find out there. But that's really where we set the majority of our campaign really falls in there. Now, go ahead.
Oh, just say, that's absolutely correct. In fact, I remember when it was kind of entertaining, because I can remember after we encountered alternity, I'm like, man, I'd love to do this for the org, but geez, it's all the space stuff. It's like, that's great, but I need more. And then we found this, and it was like, all the lights went on. There's light from heaven came down and said, here you go, Merry Christmas.
It's interesting. When we started off working with alternity, we started playing in a group that was playing a Star Drive campaign, and there was about 13 or 14 of us at one point. It was a massive campaign, and we were introduced to alternity by a friend of ours, and we kind of ran the gamut of Star Drive, and then of course we found Dark Matter. The other interesting thing of note here to look at this point is the character sheet, and this is a little bit of, and this is kind of like a transition from what you were talking about as far as the going from the D20 system to this.
Yes.
So just a few things of note. You have again, this kind of turns D&D on its head, because this is a roll low game instead of a roll high game, and so you have your ability scores, and it really tells you, if you look at the action check scores, it's really going to tell you what you need to hit, because you've got certain numbers there that will tell you, like, okay, if I roll under this, I've made an ordinary success. If I roll under this number, I've made a good success. But if I roll really low and I roll under the smallest number, I'm making an amazing success. And that also kind of widens what you're able to do as far as like, okay, it may have been a success, but to what degree success are you seeing here? And then the other thing is the sheet on the right, which is the different skills. And so this goes back to what you were talking about with the D20, where, like, if you're an EMT, you would have certain skills. And so normally, based on what type of character you're playing in alternity, you would get a certain number of points that you can use to up your ranks in certain skills. Obviously, you can try anything untrained, but it's obviously going to be much harder success if you're not trained in it. But you can up your rank in many of these things. But the way you did things was very interesting, where you said, you know what, if it makes sense for your character to have that skill, take that skill. We didn't, limit it to a certain number of points. You were just like, if you think you should have that skill, especially, because there were times where people wrote down skills and you're like, well, why would your character have that skill? And as long as they could justify it, you were like, okay, you know, and I think that's a big thing about your campaigns.
Yeah, and I think it's, to be fair, my experience is people were very good like that. You know, I didn't have someone who decided they wanted to be a farmer and decide that they want to be able to, you know, pilot a starship. Like,
Sure.
you know, I mean, people were there was a lot of common sense. Sometimes they'd want to finagle a little something, but you know, when they put it in terms of their background, I'm like, well, yeah, I don't know that I can argue with that. All right, it's a little out of the norm, but that's fine. People can be out of the norm too.
Sure.
Yeah, well, one of the things also that I think that's really important to say about this system, this roll low system, and having this degree of success and or failure, is that it opens up a vast amount of role playing opportunity.
Certainly does.
Because you can one of the frustrations that I personally, and Ralph, you and I, we've talked about this 100 times. One of the big things that I learned really early on was that while D20 is simple, it lacks finesse in terms of dealing with levels of difficulty and bonuses and penalties. Every pip on a 20-sided dice is 5%, and stop. And there's no way to make minor adjustments mean anything. Star Frontiers, for the most part, Ralph, if you remember, was percentage dice, and that was one of the things that we loved in the Star Frontiers world, because, you know, if for whatever reason you had just enough to give yourself that extra 1%, and you roll a dice, magically it worked. Like, and you're like, yes, great choice, or whatever, and you could really fine tune things, which is one of the things I loved about it. Alternity does that with a D20 without having to micromanage every percentage point, because you can set things to, it requires an amazing success, it requires, you know, good success or an ordinary success, or you know, you can then, you know, add either the way it works with bonuses and penalties is you can add a point here or subtract the point there, and adding, interesting, always remember, in the alternative world, low is good. So when you say you have a -1 bonus, that's a good thing.
And I'm going to pull up the character sheet again, because it shows that on the very bottom of the left hand side here, where you have the situation die, because basically on every roll you have your D20, and then you have your situational die based on bonuses or penalties for certain things. So if you have a better rank in something, you may get a bonus die, which you can see is then going to be subtracted from your D20 because it's roll low. But if you're in a situation where, you know, you may have a great rank in direct fire or whatever, but if you're, you know, on a cliff top way out of range, you may need to take a penalty. So you can basically still try any action. It's just, you know, you may have to take that penalty.
And again, as I mentioned, like with a lot of the role playing effect is when all of a sudden, let's say, for the amazing hit that you need, you have to roll a 3 or less, and you have to roll your 20 and add a D6 to it. Well, theoretically, you can still do that. And when you take that D6 penalty roll and you roll a 1 or a 2, and you roll that 1 on that D20, or, you know, you get the 2 on the D20 and a 1 on on the 6-sided, it's just crazy. It's like everybody starts cheering and freaking out, unless of course it's the dungeon master shooting at you.
Sure.
Then nobody's happy. But you know, it gives it that epic feel. In fact, you know, just to give you a sense of this, one of the things that Ralph mentioned was in the Star Drive campaign, I had a rather lizard-like character. I can't remember the name of the race right now. I'm drawing a blank. I'm going to totally blank on this. Anyway, the long and the short of it is they're a lizard-like character, and I really, you know, had a lot of fun with giving him bonus personality traits and penalties and all kind of crazy stuff. But one of the things he was really good at was building things, and I managed to put this ladder together that we had to get up the side of this crashed ship, like lickety split, beautifully done, and then I couldn't climb it to save my soul. think I fell down it 4 times. So I finally gave up, and then Ralph's character made it up. And I'm like, just you go do it. I'm done.
You sir were a saw. T apostrophe S-A. That is the race you were looking for, the saw.
That's it, the saw. That's right.
Yes.
And of course, to aggravate everybody, I named him Smog. So
yes. Well, so yeah, I think that Alternity is, I wouldn't say the perfect marriage, but a pretty good marriage between a D&D type game and a percentile game. It kind of merges them a little bit. It's a really interesting system. I remember when we first started playing Alternity, and we were introduced to the system and we were told it's roll low. There was like a giant collective groan around the table, because everybody was like, how are we going to learn to do this? Like, how is this going to work? And the more we played it, though, and I think this is the beauty of Alternity, because you have, you have the systems and the campaign settings that basically allow you to do anything, so many different things. But the real beauty of it is this, elegant system that is, it just completely turns what you know about role-playing games on its head, but makes so much sense once you take the time to actually learn how to use it. It's so brilliant.
Yeah, the one thing I would add, though, is combat's a lot scarier with the Alternity system.
Oh, it is
horrifying.
Yes, but I do like the idea of action checks, and so that section on the character sheet that showed the action checks, and we'll bring that up again quickly. Up at the top left where it says action check, everybody rolls for their action check, and based on the number that you roll, you either are amazing, good, ordinary, or marginal. And so every round, amazing will go first. Everybody that rolled amazing will get to go. Good then goes, ordinary goes, and marginal goes. So I think it takes what could be a chaotic situation as far as combat goes, especially with a larger table of people, and it really simplifies that chaos and kind of organizes it a bit. Now,
yes, slow but good.
Yeah, it takes a little bit more time, but it also, I feel like it makes, by taking that time, it makes combat on equal ground with role playing in the game. There's, like a lot of times you'll spend, an hour and a half just really role playing the characters, and then combat will come up and you'll go through your combat and everything will be great and combat will be done and that's it. But I feel like it puts combat on a more equal level with that role playing, where it's like, okay, we're getting into a battle here. This is going to take a while, but it makes combat so much more, I think, meaningful. People actually role play combat more in this game than I think they do in others.
Well, and the thing is, part of the reason for that is, you always almost always end up with multiple actions in any given combat, scenario. So, I mean, it's almost like segments. So there's, in old school D&D terms, so there's basically those 4 primary segments. Well, everybody who has the ability to go on the first one can, or you can delay to go on another one. And depending upon what action or what it is you want to do, you need to start paying attention to that, because, you might want to be waiting to see what happens with somebody else's attack before you launch your rocket or cast your fireball or jump in front of somebody.
It makes you think.
Absolutely. The strategy factor goes up just vastly. Because, again, really well and truly, some of the things you do may take more than one action, or, you might have a firearm or something that can literally shoot 3 times. So in order to get all 3 shots off, you have to get at least a good. So you have that many segments, if you will, to be able to shoot. It also solves the problem of figuring out whose damage affects what first. and it's based upon that order. Because I know sometimes that was always a migraine. Oh, I killed him before he hit me. Yeah, it eliminates the questions in this, because it's treated, if you're going on the same category, amazing, good, blah blah. If you go, it's considered to be simultaneous.
Yeah.
If I'm going on amazing and the critter I'm going after is going on good, and I land my hit and kill it, it doesn't get to go.
Right.
So it really sharpens the pencil on that.
Well, and imagine a situation where like a gun jams and it's going to take a round to unjam it. Well, now you have a second action in this round, so you can take that second action to try and unjam your gun instead of losing the entire next round.
Right. It's extraordinarily, and it's good because honestly, unless you completely screw up and jam your gun real good, chances are you can clear it pretty quickly.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a little bit about Alternity. Let's get a little bit into the world itself. You wanted to start talking about some of the forces in this world.
So there's actually a lot. There's a lot going on, and as I talk about this, you're probably gonna be like, dude, you're nuts. Like, how do you do that? It really is about every piece of the world having its place, and I think this is where it takes a little bit of effort to sort of structure what you're doing. The first piece of this, I would say, is the organization itself, the org, and that is a government agency. Where we started it on the first round, and I think this was even true for the second round, Ralph, when we were playing more locally, it was based out of Pittsburgh.
Yes.
And really what we try to do with this homebrew is, we'll get maps, we'll pull them up online and look at them. We'll take pictures of buildings or of neighborhoods. We've never been able to do the battle maps terribly well. We used, part of it is we just didn't have all the toys for it. But, we would occasionally use large dry erase boards where we could just sketch things and, mark where people were and moving and roughly how long it would take them.
And let's just throw this out there now, not to get you off track, but
sure,
you are the current reigning and defending king of graph paper.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I am notorious for graph paper. I use
graph paper. I use several. Amazing. Graph paper is just so much fun.
It is. I like really graph paper. This is true.
We're such nerds.
100%.
Professing our love for graph paper.
Yeah, and just the sheer variety of it. It's wonderful. Hey, we even found places online, if you recall, where you can have custom graph paper.
Yeah.
That was like Santa Claus came to visit. I was like, thanks.
Yep.
So one of the things that is we try to give it a context. So that's important. So what we decided was, to honor our fantasy roots, we took the PPG tower that kind of looks like a giant glass building, and we sort of began to call it the Crystal Castle, and that was kind of the home of the org.
Yes.
And from there, that was sort of like the central hub. What we did in the second run was everybody was somehow employed by the org. For the most part, there were a few people who were not, and then they very quickly got sucked in and ended up. One of the keys to this is if you have a bunch of characters who are not employed by the org, is that in your first adventure, it's a matter of bringing everybody under the org's umbrella.
I think it's important to note that, and I know it was during our campaign, but the second round, but people don't generally know of the existence of the org starting off. So that's very much a secretive organization with people not really knowing anything about it at the start.
And that's why the org, for the most part, seems to operate under the protocols or the auspices, if you will, of the FBI. That was kind of the way we sort of handled that. It's sort of like X-Files on steroids. Is really a way to look at it.
Yes.
So, then what ends up happening is, as this is sort of developing and going on, is in the campaign, if you're really starting at that ground level, which I think is just the most fun,
Mhm.
because every time that this has been played, when the players first meet the people of the org, they honestly think they're the bad guys.
Yeah.
Just the way they appear, the way they act, it's like there's something wrong with this.
Mhm.
Do we trust them? And then usually they don't, and then that bites them in the butt, which is entertaining as all Hades for the game master, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And then what happens is they begin to get introduced to the various groups, if you will, the major players, if you will, the nations. So one of the things about the org is there are vamps, and there is more than one type of vamp. There's basically rotters, which literally have the ability to rot. You've got more of the straight up blood vampires who will happily drink you dry. The rotters will too, but rotters will rot. They literally rot off damage. They're very, very hard to kill. The blood ones are a little squishier, but they regenerate very quickly.
Mm.
And then of course you've got your psychic vampires that just feed off of life essences. The one thing we made a point of is that the vampires in this world are legal citizens,
Mm.
but they
Interesting.
live in underground cities.
Mhm.
And that's sort of there's it's strictly regulated, and
Sure.
it's fascinating, because one of the things you can really get into with this particular part of it is the politics of who's going to like vamps and who isn't, and it can get to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Another big group are shapeshifters. Now in this world there's several kinds of shapeshifters. There's your good old fashioned, basically a lycanthrope, but it's not just a werewolf. You've got werewolves, weretaggers, werebears. I mean, you wear it, it can wear it, kind of thing.
Mhm.
That's sort of the policy. The other type is the ones who use magic to
Mm.
shapeshift themselves.
Mhm.
And then the last one is a shapeshifter that doesn't really have a form, but can take the appearance of other people.
Okay.
And I know, guys, I've written, this sounds like a lot, but here's the thing. One of the keys to this is it's almost like having Monster Manual 1 through Monster Manual 15,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
basically being able to pick and choose as you need to develop your scenario. You're not necessarily going to use all of these at one time. Like,
Mhm.
and if you do, good luck, because I think I'd have an aneurysm. And then you move sort of even beyond that, because we did decide that we wanted to use the Fae. Now, in this particular world, there was a split in Fairy. Originally, it was all one. Then you had Light Court and Dark Court. Well, what ends up happening is there's further splitting from people who are banished, and then we added a third court that we call the Unsworn.
Mm.
And each group has a separate leader. And one of the really key points to this is the role that the Fae and even these other creatures ultimately would have in sort of the world, in either its demise or defense from the darkness. We'll get to that in a
Mm.
couple of
Mhm.
minutes. The next major thing I think that's worth pointing out is there are very specific mythical creatures that can exist. And the idea is that all of these mythical creatures have the ability to appear as human when they choose to. So there's
Mm.
sort of shapeshifters, but not in the
Right.
same sense.
Right.
It's like it's this, and this is really what they are.
Yes. It's more of a camouflage or a mirage
Yes,
almost.
absolutely. The other, I guess, the next major part of this would be there are other political groups. We decided that we were going to reinstate the Templars, but as a much, much smaller order, almost destroyed. They're actually very good guys in this particular world.
Mhm.
There's another group that we're still sort of hammering out names. And I kind of laughed, because this was all in place long before I knew anything about Robert Jordan's books with the Wheel of Time. But there's this group in there called the
Mhm.
White Cloaks. It's
Mhm.
sort of along those lines,
Yeah.
but it's very politically motivated. It's sort of like your archetypal ultra goody, anything that's not perfectly white and just and holy should be destroyed.
Mm.
And that's sort of where they come from. And they don't particularly like the org. Then we have situations in which we have actual mages.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in this particular world, it is both a plethora of types of magic and magic starved. And this is a key point.
Mm.
We incorporate, and you don't hit this early unless you're really in for a interesting time, is we do sort of incorporate the idea of the multiverse, but within it, it's not necessarily parallel universes. It exists, but it's more of an infinite number of realities that are totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like one might be high fantasy. One might have a civilization that's Stone Age. Another one is Industrial Revolution. And they're linked by corridors of travel through
Okay.
space and time.
Okay.
It's an interesting kind of amalgam of that. And
Mhm.
that becomes important because you realize that this battle with the darkness isn't just about the world that the characters are in,
Mhm.
but it stretches across all of creation.
Yeah.
There's a point at which the party usually discovers a place called the Nexus, and it looks like an old dilapidated mansion. And that is a crossroads whereby people can travel from more or less one world to another.
Mhm.
And that's often represented by paintings with
Okay.
gemstones in them along
Mhm.
the bottom thing. And there are some that are completely blackened out, that have been completely conquered and destroyed by the darkness.
Yeah.
Others that you can see into sort of what the world is like. We have actually, I've had players go through them. That really got kind of fascinating quickly.
Yeah,
I
I'm
wasn't
sure.
entirely prepared for that. So then I'm thinking as a
Yeah.
dungeon master, damn, now what do I do? Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Here we go. So that becomes a piece of this. And once that happens, my pigeon is now sitting on my hand. So every time I move, I'm getting pecked. Um, the reality in this with that is, you then start to get into some really neat stuff. One of the magical abilities that we run into is old school summoning. But in terms of it just being, summoning spirits or whatever, nah. This now opens up the possibility of summoning beings from other worlds.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's a difference, I guess, if you will, between beings from other worlds and extraplanar creatures. For example, an earth elemental doesn't necessarily come from another world, but it does come from a different plane.
Mhm.
And we stack all this
Right.
to really give depth and breadth. And again, the idea is, I know it sounds like you're probably going, dude, you are absolutely wacko. Like none of this works. It actually does, as long as you don't try to fold it all together right away. It's kind of a gradual opening of a flower where all of a sudden your players start to figure this out.
Mhm.
There's another group who is kind of your absolute most batty crew you could imagine. We call
Mhm.
them the Blood Cartel.
Mm. Mhm.
And
Yes.
and this is where we brush into the far end of Hellboy, into Cthulhu a little bit, where really what they are is, we've created this kind of strange world in which, yes, there's heaven, yes, there's hell, but there's the void. And the void is that weird empty space in between all these bits of reality. And, we sort of described it as hell's hell, where the most destructive and horrible beings that existed since before the time of creation. So yeah, it's kind of a dualistic world. And interestingly enough, in this world, the real bad guys are these void lords, not necessarily devilish and demonic creatures. Not
Mhm.
that they're much better, but the real bad guys are these void creatures.
Yeah.
And the Blood Cartel is a group that is dedicated themselves to bringing these things across into the world.
Mhm.
They've sort of been promised the whole thing, the world will be completely remade. You'll be princes and stuff, blah, blah, blah. But really it's based on everything negative you can imagine. It always involves ritual sacrifice, blood. It involves, they have the ability to things like collect, fear, and terror, and hatred. All of the negative emotions, they have the ability to distill that they can then use in their sacrifices to summon these beings. Those are the principal bad guys. Now, the darkness is the general term for this void lord extreme, the biggest and baddest of the baddies. What we kind of did was we took the concept of Pandora's box and spun it.
Okay.
So in this particular universe, Pandora didn't open the box. It's somebody else who did. And that person is in the game, and I'm not sure I want to spoiler that one yet. But Pandora was the one who actually tried to talk this person out of opening it. They opened the box for the promise of all kinds of power and so on and so forth. And then when they did, they released this darkness. It's like sort of the first portal, if you will, that opens this world up to it invading. And over all the centuries, it was a slow, steady increase till all of a sudden, and in the beginning, no one understands what causes it, but all of a sudden it flips and it goes from being subtle to overt.
Okay.
And that's kind of where the org really starts to come in.
Okay.
Those are kind of the major groups. The one other thing that we sort of take advantage of sometimes is if and this is kind of, we use it as it adds to it, or if it doesn't, then we won't. But we do use the ability to treat early humanity's understanding of multiple gods as actually very specific beings that have a very specific role. They can be introduced, but again, all of this stuff now you do very carefully, because it doesn't take much to totally unbalance it. Oh, one other group. I almost forgot these guys. I never would have heard the end of it. What we decided was dragons are cool, but so Western style dragons are ultra rare. They're virtually gone from this world, but the dragons that do exist masquerade very well as humans, and it's more of the Oriental dragons.
Gotcha.
And they have their own dragon council, but they are also terribly weakened because of the invasion, if you will, of the darkness. So they're also that can be a lot of fun.
So, and this is maybe getting off on a tangent a little bit, but in discussing some of the things you talked about there, you did mention vampires, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was there not, and again, who knows what could happen down the line, but was there not an attempt at one point to try and segue this into Vampire the Masquerade as a sort of side game to the org?
There was, and we didn't get very far with it. I think it was just because we had so much else going on that we wanted to just, at the time, we were just sort of focused on keeping the main pieces together and letting it develop and grow. But creating something more based on that to address the vampire councils, because the other interesting piece to this is there's a difference between the American councils and the old European councils. So you actually even have another tension built into the game between the old world and the new, even the vampire community.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it's a hoot, because realistically speaking, at any point you could be dealing with anything. One last thing, even sort of adjacent to this, if you will, that I should probably put out there, is the whole Men in Black thing. Well, you got the Men in Black supernatural events, blah blah blah. Well, we also have a great heavy reliance on fringe technology, and one of the things that really gets neat is, if you can dream it and you can make some vaguish sense out of it, you could probably have something. Also, one of the canon characters is actually not of this earth. And he plays a major role within the org. The organization itself is headed by, yes, get this, 13 people. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, and now in contrast, the Lich Gate, that's the folks who run the blood cartel. There are also 13 of them.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yeah, absolutely. But part of that theme is, if you just take the numbers and look at it, who's who?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Are they really against each other? And this is one of the tricks to it. It's like when you're really going in this, it makes, both times that I've run this, like, for a lengthy period, it was amazing how long it took for the player characters to figure out that really the org were the good guys.
Well, and and speaking from experience, the org is not, the org really doesn't run themselves like they're the good guys. They're, the org is very much like the mafia. Like, okay, now you know who we are, do what we tell you or else. And that's pretty much like, they show up, they get the job done, and they're out. Like, it's very much, it doesn't surprise me as much from a player standpoint, just because in looking at what we're looking at, they do not seem like the good guys at all. But I think it's an interesting contrast, because I don't think that the players necessarily, at least in the second go around, I don't think the players necessarily thought that the org were the good guys. They weren't the bad guys, and they were the ones going after the bad guys. So,
right.
There's a big distinction there between deciding, hey, are these really good guys, or are these just some guys who are doing some good things at the moment?
And that really feeds into the whole idea of the of the campaign, in that, the more morally gray everything appears to be, I find, as a game master, the more interesting it is to watch the player characters. And maybe this is a point where I think sort of throwing a little bit of my own personal style out there will help explain some of this.
Sure.
One of the things that I think is important is, preparation is always good. Like you kind of want to know what's going on, but there comes a point at which you don't want to over prepare. And one of the keys to this is realizing that you're not going to think of everything, and you shouldn't try to, because if you allow the players, and you do have to think quick on your feet, and sometimes it's a delay tactic till you can think it through, or it gives you a great idea and you just have to gently tug at it to get it set. But the player characters will do things all the time that just make me squee with delight. And unfortunately, Ralph can usually see when it happens, because I get this this excited look like a kid on Christmas morning, and he's like, stop giving him ideas. And
listen, if your most famous line is, are you sure you want to do that, my most famous line is, stop giving him ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, because I run games too, and I can see it in your face. And you and I feel like we connect as game masters because we have very much reactionary styles of gameplay. Like, we're very reactionary to what our players do, and I think a lot of times that's why I see things that others at the table may not see right away, and I'm like, stop it right now. Stop giving him ideas.
Well, and the thing is, part of that is like, it's not and I say this to people all the time who are learning, it's not the game master's job to kill a player characters. It really is not. They do that well enough on their own.
Common misconception.
It's the best game master is one who literally can tell the story and adapt it on the fly to make it real, to keep drawing the players into the world that they're in. I mean, do characters die? It happens. Yeah, it does.
It's life.
But one of the things is, and I tell people also as a game master, there's nothing wrong with coming up with a creative way to avoid a disaster. where all of a sudden something just goes awry, and you're like, yeah, we're not rebooting this. And as long as it makes sense and isn't super obvious, there's nothing wrong with having an NPC show up to save the day.
Sure.
Again, as long as it makes sense.
Yeah, and I think to your point, you can always tell when a game master is, and I hate calling people bad game masters, because I don't really think it's necessarily being a bad game master, but I feel like at times, if something happens in a game and a game master has to spend 10 minutes in a book trying to figure out how to make a ruling on this, or how to solve this, or what's next, that's a problem. And that goes back to your being able to take what players do and react to it on the fly. And it's something you need to be able to do, because again, it goes back to if you're going to be a player who's going to be like a rules master the whole time, and this says this, but that can also be the downfall of a game master too.
Yes, again, 100%.
You have to be confident not only in the game you're playing, but you have to be confident in your skills as a game master to say, what, this is the decision I'm making, and this is what goes. Like, you have to be able to do that.
And you know what? Sometimes it's going to be wrong, and that's okay. Because again, there are ways that as a game master you can sort of make that up. Sure. Even if it's going out of character and having a discussion and going, yeah, we'll fix this later. Just go with it. Keep the flow going. The other thing that I would put out there, just from personal experience, where it kind of makes me want to gouge somebody's eyes out through their ears with a spoon, is, as a game master in any campaign, but especially a homebrew, don't execute your players. If your players have got into a position where the bad guys have them, and that may be a possibility, figure something out quickly, because nothing is going to drive your player bananas more than a no-win situation where you're just toast. And honestly, I it's not about avoiding hurting someone's feelings. I mean, that's part of it, but it's like, again, we all have characters. There's a story I can tell you about. One time I played Ravenloft with a paladin. That will tell you about how annoying that can be. You remember the Rose story, Ralph?
Oh yeah.
And it's one of those deals where, it's annoying, but it is what it is.
Sure.
But worse than that is it can disrupt, if it's not something that you really want to have happen, or it doesn't have to be a teaching moment to basically tell people, don't go out of your way to be stupid.
Right.
I usually say try and find a way, because if it's not part of really where you want things to go, or it's just going to create, like I said, such a huge disruption, it's not worth it. It just doesn't work.
Nobody should ever walk out of a building and take one shot to the head and die.
Yeah, right.
Should never happen. Yeah. So, all right. So anything else about the world here that you think people should know as far as backstory goes?
I think that's probably pretty good. I mean, the biggest thing is, again, remember, the org grew out of a need for the government to respond to this. The idea of old hunter clans sort of coming together really resonates with that. These things still exist. The cool part about the org universe is it's very, very flexible. You can really play with it and add pieces to it. It's really, really kind of nifty. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while, but I mean, at some point this stuff's getting codified. I mean, I just because I think it's cool. And I'm kind of proud of it. I have to be very honest. I mean, I don't say that too terribly often.
Yeah.
But the world really, really does work.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to realize, as far as this world goes, this is not a This is not a quote unquote say Ghostbusters situation where there are creatures in the world, there are people that take care of it, and it's like front page news. The average person has no idea any of this is going on.
Well,
So
it depends upon where in the timeline, because there is a point at which it sort of hits maximum, I don't know, maximum publicity, if you will, when things completely go down the crapper. But your campaign certainly does not need to start there. There's one little thing that was a drabble that was written some time ago that I think is a beautiful bit that I've used at times to introduce people to the org universe.
Okay.
Do we have enough time for me to pull it up and just
we've
read it for
got
everybody?
we've got all the time in the world here, bud.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Before we go any further, let me go ahead and do this, because this might spark some more some more things. So just bear with me.
Sure.
I have to switch screens.
No, go right ahead. Do what you need to do.
All right, here we go. Now, this was written from the perspective that this actually introduces three of the primary characters. One of them is called the Charmer, another is called Spaceman, and the last is referred to as Mr. Bell. I'll explain that as we go through and at the end.
Right.
And it basically presents an episode, if you will, of when things are much more out in the open. But this gives you a real feel, I think, for the world that they're in.
All right, take it away.
Okay. Oops, hang on. My scroller is misbehaving here. God forbid I actually hang on one second, guys. I'm sorry.
Listen, if you saw all the technical stuff that was going on here to make this work, you'd be out of your mind.
I'm just trying to get this open, and for some reason,
you
is
keep working on that there. While you're working on that, I'll remind everybody here that brand new episodes of Tabletop Baristas will be appearing on the Opinion City Podcast YouTube page. So we're at Opinion City Pod on YouTube. So make sure you check out not only this episode, but other episodes as well. Follow us on all the socials at Opinion City Pod. You can follow at Ben Frank Connect, where you'll get everything we're doing as far as Opinion City, Tabletop Baristas. You'll get all of ABJ's stuff there as well. And you can follow me at Real Ralph 316. We appreciate the support. And if you are enjoying this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you never miss anything that we're doing. We appreciate you for joining us here on this maiden voyage as we discuss the backstory of the org. And
okay. All right, I found it. I think we're good now.
We're ready to go. All right, take it away.
The darkness rolled thickly, intertwining with the heavy fog which had descended upon the valley, coating the earth in a potent brand of despair, too pervasive to evade, and somehow far too enticing to escape. It wasn't something most people could see necessarily, but rather something that was felt, creeping along the skin in prickling lines, forcing the little hairs on the back of the neck to stand at attention, wicked intent slithering through the mind, coaxing compliance from the evils cloaked in the shadow. The world beyond the rapidly fading last light of dusk was a perilous one. No one was safe and nothing was sacred. Maybe it would have been easier to hate such a place, but whatever else could be said about the twisted nightmare of the world sprawling out before her, it was home. Soft clicking sounds in her ear confirmed that the other lines of communication were being opened up through the earpiece she wore. Rounding the corner of a massive reflective building she was meant to be securing, she noted the lumbering presence of something that looked as though it had come straight out of a Frankenstein remake. The flesh rotting, but one giant flesh-stitched tapestry. Undead, she instantly recognized. That portion of her innards that dealt in picking apart the spell crafting of others, silently analyzing what it could be that they were in for tonight. Tonight of all nights. A wary eye glanced skyward, not at all put at ease by the sight found there. As a child, her father had warned her of nights such as these, when the ravenous mist stole the very heat from the summer air, and the full moon above glared crimson with blood. The darkness has eyes, that's what he used to say. Yeah, eyes, ears, teeth, and claws. To the things that roamed in the night, they were nothing but prey. Good or bad, guilty or innocent, the darkness would not suffer any of them to live in the end. Something had to be done. But how did you catch an enemy with no body? How did you kill something that didn't technically exist? Yeah, good luck with that one. Just under 2 decades ago, the world had changed. What brought it on exactly, how and why, no one quite knew. But for many, this disaster had signaled the beginning of the end. Back then, she'd been too young to remember many of the details. Only when she was older could she go back and reflect upon the magnitude of what had happened. One moment, things were fairly well and normal, and the next. It was as if every horrific monster from every piece of imagination throughout history had suddenly just manifested in the flesh across the globe, tearing through the populace faster than any form of authority could dream up in a defense. Sure, monsters like that had been spotted milling through the shadows in the past, but these accounts were often dismissed as wild nonsense, like Bigfoot sightings. Undead, abominations, vengeful spirits, soul-eating shadows, vicious beasts, dark casters, and bloodthirsty villains of every variety claim this world as their own. And who should rise to counter that? Then the monsters who, arguably, were there first. Werebeasts, vampires, elven mysteries, mythical monsters of legend and keepers of lore. The darkness had never expected such an uprising. Somehow the world was preserved for a short time longer, save for that which came by cover of night. With the cat out of the bag, so to speak, the world had no choice but to recognize that there was much more going on right under their collective noses than anyone had ever wanted to know. Gone were the days of blissful ignorance, when those things moving in the shadows really were just odd shifts of light, and wandering out past nightfall wasn't just reserved for those with power or skills necessary to survive doing so. Instead of being delightfully unaware of all things less than normal, the general population knew very well these days that looking away and pretending not to notice the things they didn't want to accept just wasn't going to cut it anymore. Widespread panic ensued, rioting, suicide campaigns, the works. Things had gotten out of control. In the past, the government had always hired freelance hunters, individuals with specialized talents, who could generally handle unusual threats without alarming the natives. Some were magic users, some were shapeshifters, weapons masters, and assorted unaligned others. In all cases, these were people whose abilities had no real place among the mundane of society. Who better to hunt the monsters than those who were, by social standard, monsters themselves? So long as the booties were high enough, though, there had always been hunters willing to face off with the stuff of nightmares. However, when the darkness had descended upon them in earnest, and the world, as everyone had known it, had gone down the metaphysical toilet, the hunters themselves started recruiting. From those dark times arose the organization as the refined, well-oiled machine of bad thing ruination that it was in most recent history. The Organization for Paranormal Investigation, Supernatural Security, and Extraplanar Defense was, by no stretch of the imagination, a new group, but in terms of their assimilation into the United States government as a whole, they were the most recent addition, intended to handling both fieldwork and public relations nightmares caused by everything that went bump in the night. Except their group didn't get any nifty acronyms to slap on a badge, since when you put it all together, it spelled "Oh Pissed." And while she personally might have liked to run around shrieking about being on the Opist team. It just wasn't the best image. When their when their lot had to be named, they were very simply the organization. Its goal to seek out magical mishaps, supernatural surprises, and interplanar invasions, and well, fix them. Good times, right? Stay back now, Charmer. Over their earpiece came the voice of Aaron Velascar, who more or less acted as their commanding officer in field missions, such as this one. Spaceman, they called him. It made sense if you took into consideration that this planet was a long way from home for him, despite his human appearance. Everyone in the org had a code name, excuse me, that they used, most of which were oh so appropriate hints as to what their particular specialty was. Charmer was hers, and contrary to popular belief, it wasn't a commentary on her sparkling personality. The snarky brunette with big black boots might not have looked like much on the surface, but in truth, she was a first-tier summoner, aka disaster incarnate. There wasn't a living thing out there that could resist her sheer force of will when she really put her mind to swaying them to her side. But then again, that didn't much benefit anyone when your enemies mostly tended to be undead. Derp. Yeah, well, no one is perfect. Under the eerie glow of the tainted moonlight, the giant necromantic nightmare of cross-stitched experiment gone seriously gonzo began digging up huge chunks of cement, the areas where it held the stuff seeming to sizzle as if melting away under its grasp. There was no real need to rush in after it just yet. It hadn't noticed her. For one, and for another, it was moving so slowly that there was plenty of time for the rest of the team to get themselves assembled. For now, she got to play the waiting game. The story of her life, right? Not that she did that very well, mind. She was more the shoot first and ask questions later type, in a manner of speaking. Not that an attitude like that tended to work out all that well for her or anything. Even as that thought crossed her mind, the grunting yuck she'd been keeping in her line of sight finally took notice of her, responding by pitching a chunk of hissing sidewalk at her head like it didn't weigh a thing. So strong, but not fast. She could work with that. Having plenty of time to dodge, she hopped off to the side, one hand diving into the long plum-hued trench coat she wore, lingering on the gun holstered at her hip. If the thing was going to come after her, she tried dumping bullets into it, but otherwise she had far better methods for wrangling undead constructs, and that required the use of both hands. When it seemed the thing was more interested in returning to its task, other than trying to chase her down, she backed off the gun. Instead, she began tracing obscure shapes into the air before her, whispering incantations in a language that sounded suspiciously as though they didn't quite belong to this world at all. The first pass seemed to have little effect, but by the second pass, the lines she was drawing had begun to glow in amber, trailing after her fingers, illuminating the source of the spell and drawing the creature's ire once more. A growing symbol flickered into existence around the creature, preventing it from moving outside of its boundaries. At least this way, they could keep an eye on the thing. Orders meant for the rest of the team erupted in her ear, while the pretty caster was momentarily distracted by refracting colors of both spells and glowing to life, and the plasma rifles going off in the dead of night, glinting off the side of the PPG place. Solely the most shiny building in the city of Pittsburgh. Come to think of it, she probably should have moved away from the building before doing this stuff, huh? Too late. Glass shattered behind her as an errant chunk of pavement was torn up again by the rasping amalgam terror and pitched in her general direction. Property destruction for fun and profit? Crap. They were going to end up taking this out of her paycheck. Blue lights pummeled the necromantic horror of an ick factory, while the thing just kept poisoning the air with its stench of decay and infusing the very ground it tramped upon with its own special brand of energy taint. Mechanical sounds washed over the makeshift battlefield as several gun-looking attachments, mounted to the arms of what appeared to be an imposing high-tech battlesuit, still glowed electric blue with power, shooting discs of light out at the creature any time it went to move. Wet sloshing sounds hubbled up from the creature's misshapen throat as black sludge rolled out of its mouth, a faint black mist emanating from the sludge. With a fair amount of agitation, the creature threw itself into the wall of protective magic she'd conjured to contain it, feeling its corrosive aura chipping away at her spell little by little. Her stomach flip-flopped uncontrollably, even as Spaceman in his battlesuit moved to get in between her and the unhappy undeadling. For her part, the spunky summoner took a hint and moved back as far as she was able while still keeping the thing inside her casting range. It's rotting everything it touches, so don't let it get its hands on you. Some murmured confirmations. She, on the other hand, grumbled with her own observations. Yeah, well, don't let it crawl out underground. If it's got insta-corrupt properties, I'd just as soon not let it hit a water main. The groan crackled over the shared line, likely from one of Velascar's men. But there was... Speaking again, it came from the spaceman himself. Got a critter to call? Not that I'd risk. I'm going for containment and purification, so stay out of my circles. Don't be a hero, Charmcakes. If it makes a run for it, you get yourself back to HQ. Understood? It wasn't a question, although he was the sort of guy that was good enough to let you have the illusion he was giving you a choice. Of anyone, she'd rather take her orders from him, you know, when she took for them from anyone at all, which was to say practically none of the time. Aye, aye, Captain. Oh my, she could almost feel the eye roll response, even though she couldn't see it to confirm. Hey, at least she hadn't started singing to him this time. That should earn her a few brownie points at least. Honestly, she wasn't worried about their icky poo monster over there. This wouldn't be the first time they had to stop a creature from trying to rip up the place, and she knew very well that it wouldn't be the last. Why was that? Well, she had her suspicions that it had a lot to do with the ebb and flow of natural energy throughout the shifting ground-based rivers known to most casters as simply ley lines. You didn't find better, pure sources of power or magic-y type to pull upon than from them or from the sinks that created those lines. What was more, most anyone who had any sort of psychic gift would unconsciously be reaching for that raw power source. Free power, you know? It was the kind of stuff that didn't deplete one's own internal reserves quite so much, and often would be tapped into for continued warding in the case of widespread long-term area protectives. One of the biggest sinks on the East Coast lie right here under their feet, and it powered one of the largest magical warding grids in the whole country. Corrupt such a line right at the source, and you could turn hundreds of thousands of casters toward the darkness practically overnight. She had to hand it to old Rasputin. It wasn't a bad plan. Well, if not for them, the meddling kids. What could she say? It was a gift. With one hand, she traced a circular symbol in the air, energy crackling through the immediate area with electric intensity, this time blue-white light glowing from her fingertips as she traced a different symbol in the air with whispered words too low to make sense of, again doing so 3 times over. The final pass creating another large rune-based circle around the mighty creature in question. Sensing that it had not only been caged, but also stuck inside a power that would slowly eat away at it, the thing raged against the shielding even harder, only finding itself shocked by the new purifying energy for its trouble. You got it? The intergalactic man's voice was firm, but not entirely confident. His end of things was entirely technology-based, so he had a hard time accepting that any of her goofy stuff did much of anything useful. The summoner, however, begged to differ on that point. For now, she replied emphatically, already calling up her next volley of casting, opting to go with things that would negate the poisonous vapors the creepy thing was spewing up before someone got themselves in trouble. This was the role she fell into when she couldn't call upon her usual power set, support stuff, and whatnot. It was not her preference, but whatever. She did what needed doing. Often she bore often before she had to be told. Then again, she balanced it out by doing a lot of what she wasn't supposed to. Like now, for instance, one of Spaceman's guys had moved a little too close to the toxic zone and had dropped instantly. Smart thing would have been to stay where she was, but she had no man left behind policy, and with the way this thing was straining its corruption against her spell, she wasn't entirely sure the guy would be okay if everything fell apart. Don't. What? It was like Spaceman knew what was in her head or something. Well, he should. They'd worked together for how long now? So, if he knew what she was thinking, he also had to know that there wasn't a thing he could say to her that would keep her butt over there while that guy got chewed. Note, not happening. Just cover me, she muttered, shaking out the energy out of her hands, but to no avail. Grr. She was going to be frigging a metaphysical torch. Well, whatever. Now or never. Spaceman was grumbling at her, but he moved to obscure her purple-clad form as she darted over to their fallen comrade, dispelling the toxicity in the air with one solid arm motion. The same white-blue light as before gliding around the guy, doing away with the bad stuff. With him unconscious, she had to drape his arms around her shoulder and hoist him up, and the dead weight as best she could, to the cadence of her own pounding heart. Memo to self, get some upper body strength, because holy cow, this was not working. All in one fatal moment, the last shred of the stability of the shielding that she had provided collapsed against the corruptive nature of the creature's own power. With a gurgling cry, it launched itself in their direction, deftly intercepted by Spaceman's power suit. It gripped a cannon on one arm, twisting it aside with shocking force. Immediately, the robotic arm started to hiss, even the strange alien metal falling prey to the destructive force in motion. The creature used the momentary distraction to force the suit back, pushing it harder than the thing ever should have been able to, ramming Spaceman's mech right into the side of the building. Spaceman, she shouted, panic shooting through her chest as her gaze flitted between the slow-moving giant, headed right for her and the dark, jagged hole in the reflective glass. Swearing came from the other end of the comm, and then, get out of there. She'd already been on it, but hell, it wasn't as though she had much anywhere to go. No way she would leave this guy behind, and she couldn't move fast enough with the extra baggage to evade the thing. If she threw up some circles, she could call her transport summons in time to get them back to the base? No time. It was too close. Its putrid aroma was growing even stronger. Excuse me. The runes cast into her coat began to glow bright amber, shielding her from the effects of the mist, but it wouldn't last much longer. It couldn't. Gently, she set the teammate down and stepped in front of him, gun drawn, aimed up high, going for the head. Zombies didn't shamble when you smash their brains in, right? Pressure on the trigger, hard swallow before hissing out her teeth. How many shots would it take to blow a hole in this thing's skull? Did she even have enough ammo? It would have to be enough. She was fresh out of options. Just then, before she could fire off the first shot, the creature's head exploded in a rain of squishy pieces, slimy glops, and hard bone fragments. The rest of the body fell apart at the seams, literally, becoming nothing more than big, rank piles of body parts, whose enchantments had been destroyed. She stood there dumbly for a moment, trying to absorb the fact that not only were they both in one piece, but the thing in question was not. Blinking slowly, her gaze traveled upward, spotting a familiar silhouette against the apt backdrop of the blood moon. Show off, she muttered at him through the shared line, huffing a light sigh of relief. Thanks, Mr. Bell. A smooth southern drawl rolled out of the earpiece then, even as the shadow in question ducked back out of sight. Any time there, Missy, any time. Crap, she was never going to hear the end of this. And there you have it.
All right. Well, quite a colorful intro to the world of the org. Definitely giving us a little peek into some of the major characters and just some of the different types of things that are going on in the world between magic and summoning and technology and all these different things kind of marrying together into this sort of hodgepodge world here.
Yeah, well, one of the things I have to point out there, just as kind of an interesting note, do you have any idea why the Southern Gentleman's code name was Mr. Bell?
Do I have any idea why? I don't.
You might not be. You might not be old enough to get this one, but if you recall, we used to have Ma Bell reach out and touch someone.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
that was kind of
wow.
the spin for the sniper.
I got you. Very nice. Yeah, that's a great little introduction. And as you said, that was during a time when things were more widely known and publicized as far as what was going on.
Yeah, the last time when we had actually played is I rewound the timeline quite a bit to give us that feel of this is now just becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm. And so just in talking in some of the differences between the second round, which we did, and your first round, the second round was based around the hometown where we lived, you and I, and pretty much everyone else that was playing the game, and we all had some sort of connection to that town, and we were all there when something happened. But the first go around, was that the same kind of way you did it, or was there?
No, actually, it really was, because one of the keys to the believability of it, especially, if everybody's playing and you're all from the same area, is it really immerses you into the world. Now you're going to change things a little bit,
Sure.
but it's like, even from the local lore, we had a couple of people show up, which was absolutely entertaining beyond words. And we kind of had something very similar to that at the first round. At that point, it was out more around like the Altoona, Johnstown area.
Sure.
And that was absolutely entertaining beyond words. People really enjoyed it, and pretty much everybody from that area had been to Pittsburgh any number of times.
Yeah.
So it all worked really well.
All right, so let's look forward here a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen from here on out. So, continuing with Tabletop Baristas, we're going to start working into a little bit more of the actual mechanics of the game, and talk about some of the different things. We'll do some character creation and things like that to give people an idea of what we're really talking about here, kind of immerse people a little bit more into it. We do have coming down the line at some point in the future, I don't want to put too much information out there right now, but we do have a one shot that we're looking to do at one point. But as far as starting another campaign, let's talk a little bit about that, because we have mentioned that in talking between you and I. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like.
Sure. Realistically speaking, I think at this point, most of the folks who play were a little bit more scattered than we were before. So, one of the things I think was we're going to take advantage of some of the modern technology, so that way we can all connect from a whole variety of areas.
Sure.
I think, realistically speaking, as a group, what we'll have to decide is sort of where in the timeline we want to begin, because that sort of changes things.
Sure.
And then, there's some other bits and pieces, but yeah, I mean, I definitely see it on the horizon. And without giving anything terribly detailed away, I don't remember, Ralph, if you and I talked about it, but there was another gaming system that we were looking at playing, which I had decided to incorporate via a bit of a back door into this particular world.
I don't know if we've had that conversation or not.
Oh, okay. Well, there was.
We may not have. So
let's just say post-apocalypse.
Oh, okay. All right.
And there was a point of that. One of the things that we've often talked about is, once the campaign progressed far enough, was to start playing with the Nexus a little bit more, and being able to do things like, maybe stepping through into a world that's been taken over by zombies, or all kind of things like that. And that's sort of the beauty of it, is because we really have that ability.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think we've got a really good start on things here. We gave people quite a bit of information here about the backstory of the world of the org. I think that people, should have a real good handle on that. And as we continue to dive into the different aspects of the system, the gameplay, all of that, we will be referencing the backstory and things like that. So it'll be really interesting to see where this adventure takes us. Obviously, we're hoping to lead into an actual play series. So that's kind of on the horizon. But for now, we want to thank you for joining us on this journey. It is, again, just the start of the journey. There's quite a bit to see and hear and do at this point. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the Opinion City Podcast channel on YouTube. That way you can get all of our videos when they come out. And we would love to hear from you. So please make sure you are commenting on the video. If you have questions, opinioncitypod@gmail.com. If you want to talk about the game, the backstory, any of that, we're more than open to discussing all of this with you, because again, we're doing this because we want you to come along this journey with us as we sort of return to the world of the org. So big thanks go out to Joe, of course, for coming along on this journey and putting in all the work to get us all the great information about the org. Of course, thanks to your other half, Ginger, as well, who has contributed quite immensely to this as well, with the backstory in the world of the org. So yeah, we're the Tabletop Baristas. I'm Ralphie's Joe, and this has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
All right, and we will see you guys next time.
And remember, don't microwave your dice unless you're buying new ones.
All right, good night.
Good night.
Hey, thanks for watching this presentation. Like, share, and subscribe for more.